I've changed my mind. I want the AI now to have my ad profile. You've convinced me. I was just thinking of it as like our sycophantic AIs I'd be like, oh my God, Chris, if you have this aftershave, you're going to smell great. You're going to be like the best smelling guy in the whole wide world.
I want to be able to ask questions about Pokemon for my kids and not have to then see advertisements about Pokemon everywhere.
I think we really see the shift from this assisted AI to truly agentic AI coding.
I don't want to treat this as a I told you so moment, but I'm going to say I told you so.
All that and more on today's Mixture of Experts. I'm Tim Hwang, and welcome to another episode of Mixture of Experts. Each week, MOE brings together a panel of the smartest minds working at the very frontiers of artificial intelligence to make sense of the week's news. Joining us today are three brilliant panelists. We've got Chris Hay, Distinguished Engineer, joining us again. Gabe Goodhart, Chief Architect, AI Open Innovation. And joining us for the very first time is Francesco Brenna, VP and Senior Partner, Global Leader, AI Integration Services. As always, we've got a lot to talk about. We've got a packed episode today. We're going to cover the explosion in interest around Claude Code. We're going to talk about IBV's new Enterprise 2030 report and a super interesting project called Open Responses. But first, I really want to start with, I would say, the kind of big controversy of the week. OpenAI coming out and admitting for the very first time that they are interested in deploying ads into the ChatGPT experience. So this has been a long rumored thing. We saw some initial kind of discussion around it sort of earlier last year. But this is kind of the first kind of confirmation that, yes, this will be a direction that ChatGPT is moving in. And that's going to be coming to a chatbot near you very soon. And so maybe, Chris, I'll kick it over to you first. I think a lot of people took a look at this and said, this is kind of a head scratcher if you believe in, we're going to build AGI and take over the world and we're going to have an AI that can do everything economically. Why would you also need to have an ad business in all this if you're really building, the machine god?
You give away your AI for free? I don't understand. How do you make the money? Senator, we deploy ads.
Yeah.
I mean,
I get
reality.
That reference. Yeah,
exactly. So I think the reality is, right? So, if you think about OpenAI's mission there, of course, you have the subscription tiers, etc. But the reality is inference costs a lot of money. And you can see that from the investment in all the data centers that they're making and all the partnerships and the amount of compute that's being used. And I think the latest numbers are something like 800 million weekly users of ChatGPT. So, inference-wise, somebody's going to have to pay for that. And therefore, if you're going to give away that for free in the kind of lower tiers, then it's going to come with ads, right? And that's just a reality. That compute's got to be paid for somewhere. And sure, I'm sure they'll be able to pay for things in other areas, but money has to be paid. And you've seen the latest revenue reports, etc. And that's why ads is. I think what is probably more interesting though on the ads thing is probably I think it's called the Go tier, the $8 a month tier. And that will also have ads as well. And I think that's super interesting, which is like you get the higher limits, but you're still getting the ads at the same time. So, at the end of the day, I don't think this is a surprise. Google went through this journey. Social media, whether it's Meta, etc., they went through this journey. And now the AI companies are going through this journey as well. So it's, not surprised.
Yeah, I do want to talk about it on the backdrop of history here, because it's sort of interesting. I've looked into this in the past. I mean, early days search engines, people were like, oh, well, you'll just pay $5 a month to use Google, right? And like that was one of the business models that was being explored at the time. Chris, as you say, ads kind of took over the space. I guess, Gabe, from your perspective, I mean, is this just history repeating? We shouldn't be surprised. And maybe actually in 10 years, ads are going to be the predominant model. No one's going to spend $200 a month for this stuff. And what we're going to end up with is a world where you get these products largely free and we just accept advertising. Is that where we're headed with the technology?
I mean, I have a hard time seeing us going in any other direction because nobody likes to pay for things and everyone's pretty good at this point at ignoring ads. But this was totally inevitable and, disappointing, but not surprising. Honestly, the main reason I have used ChatGPT over, say, Gemini or something else from a already integrated entity like Google is that it doesn't influence my ads profile. I don't start seeing everything in my news feed that relates to the things I talked about in my AI bot. And so my real hope, the thing that I actually thought was interesting from this this piece that they put out about their ads is they had some very clear principles that they stated. And number one at the top of them was that the actual generated content will not be influenced by the ads profile, and that it'll essentially live in parallel to the generated content that comes out of the models. Now, this is not a legally binding contract. They haven't necessarily put anything that it says I think they use the words never, but that's a fuzzy word.
Sure.
So if they can hold to that and they can actually try to stay principled about the product remaining true to its mission and not privileging certain results over others, I think there's potentially still some firewall of the capabilities relative to the economics of an ad-driven model. And I hope they keep that, right? I mean, the optimist in me says, maybe they can hold on to some elements of trying to do it right. But ultimately, what I really care about is just at least don't sell my ads profile to other advertisers. Don't make this whole advertising ecosystem on the back end. I hate having to reverse engineer my internet profile. I don't. I want to be able to ask questions about Pokemon for my kids and not have to then see advertisements about Pokemon everywhere, right? This should be okay.
Yeah, we have AI. We should be able to solve this problem,
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So inevitable, disappointing. I hope that they stay principled.
Francesco, you're joining us for the very first time, so I'll give you the hard question for this segment. There's a really fascinating document. One of my favorite documents in the history of the internet is basically a paper where Larry Page and Sergey Brin lay out their algorithm for PageRank. And in this paper, which you can still get online, there's an appendix at the very end, which, they got dragged over the coals for, to kind of Gabe's point, where the appendix says a search engine should never use advertising because it would introduce such perverse incentives as to make the product entirely untrustworthy and not useful, right? And obviously, we know how things turned out. A few $1 billion changed their mind. But should we worry, right? I mean, I guess the obvious question looming over all this is, it feels like a little bit, that the incentives are suddenly misaligned in a world where, the original promise of some of these products would be that they would be kind of a trusted partner, a trusted assistant, take your pick of metaphor. So curious about how you navigate that. Do you think that's going to be a big kind of trust gap issue that they're going to have to overcome, particularly because they started with subscription?
To be honest, Tim, I actually see it exactly like Gabe and Chris. I don't think that's going to happen. I believe it's very disappointed indeed, but I think it was inevitable. And to be honest, I see this really as a pragmatic step towards to just
you guys
align.
are so jaded on this
Yeah,
panel.
it's really and what I see, I also see a positive, right? If this is going to subsidize the free access for student educators or in general people who can really afford a subscription, which we all know is a significant portion of the world, right? I think that's a good outcome for us, right? So I'm still fairly positive about it.
Well, we'll have to keep an eye on this. I think it'll be really interesting to see how they draw some of these lines, Gabe, because I think this is, now they're in the game of a two-sided market. It kind of feels like a lot of this is, well, that feels okay, that feels a little gross. That feels okay, that still feels a little gross. And we're now in that dance,
Francesco, to your point, the low-level advertising that we're all very good at ignoring. I have how many different streaming services? Each one of them started with, I'm going to pay a small amount a month and get no ads. Oh, and it turns out that business model isn't sustainable, so they started introducing ads in their cheap plan. Okay, I'm still fine with that. I think... Do I wish I could have it all? Sure. But I think, this will make this accessible, hopefully, in a subsidized market. And that can be a good thing. So
I've changed my mind. I want the AI now to have my ad profile. You've convinced
that was
me.
fast.
I was just thinking of it as our sycophantic AIs I'd be like, oh my God, Chris, if you have this aftershave, you're going to smell great. You're going to be the best smelling guy in the whole wide world. In fact, you could probably invent this yourself. You don't need to buy this. Let's do it, Chris. You could be the guy. I'm all for that. It's oh my God, Chris, you got to try this top on. You're going to be the most handsome guy. You could just walk up to anyone Yeah, no. I've changed my mind. We need ads integrated into the AI. That's what you got to do. You got to backtrack OpenAI, and we all know that whatever you say can be backtracked at any time. History has taught us this. Backtrack, get those ads integrated with the AI.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you heard it here first. I mean, so Chris, you are picking up on one final point I wanted to touch on here, which is the form factor a differentiation, right? Which is we feel okay about billboards because it's very clearly an ad that's like on the side of the highway you drive past. We're okay with search because we have norms about the idea. And for Google for a very long time was like, we're going to label all the ads, right? Is there something about the conversational interface that makes ads particularly something we should worry about here? Or is this just kind of, again, it seems like the response that all three of you guys have is history repeating. We'll get used to it.
No, we need billboards to be more interactive. We got to get the cameras pointed at us, and when I'm walking along, it points an advert at me
Full
straight away.
Yeah.
and then just draw a little shape around me so it knows who it's speaking to. Here's your personalized ad. Next person.
Sure.
Wouldn't that be great? You're walking along, and then it's just like you there.
There are definitely novels about this, Chris. There are definitely novels.
You have
about exactly
self-confidence
this.
issues. Here we go. Next one. And everybody's like, oh my God, please don't pick me out, billboard. I don't want to know. Yeah, no, more interactive in the billboards. Everything shouldn't be passive anymore.
Got it. Gabe, sounds like you might have a final comment on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's an interesting parallel to influencer culture here, which is that, for a long time, advertisements were actors paid to act in advertisements, and you saw them, in pictures on billboards, in commercials on TV, and it was very clear this is an advertisement. And then in the social media space, you start getting paid influencers who are supposed to just be regular old people that you build trust with, but they're actually getting paid to show a product, right? And that's become, so I think to your point, Tim, and one thing that they explicitly stated here from OpenAI is that they will isolate the ads in a bottom bar and say, this is an ad. And if they stick with that, we're still in that, this is a paid actor model. But as soon as those ads start filtering into the actual results that are getting generated, if they ever walk that back, we're in that influencer space where now it's hard to tease apart what's a genuine, trustworthy opinion coming out of this trusted source versus what's something that's getting paid and promoted. And that gets much harder to tease apart. So I hope we don't hit that with AI. We'll see.
I'm going to move us on to our next topic, which I want to just take a moment to talk a little bit about Claude Code. We've, of course, been talking about Claude Code a lot on this show. But I was joking with a friend. It was it felt like kind of what happened over the holidays. Or what happened, if you remember, with Bitcoin a number of years ago, where everybody went home, they had a little bit of time to play around with Bitcoin, and they also told their parents about Bitcoin. And so in the months right after the holidays, you saw Bitcoin have this huge explosion of interest and price and all this sort of stuff. It feels like maybe the same thing happened with Claude Code. It certainly happened with me, where I had a day or two after the holidays, and I was like, well, let's just kind of play with what's been happening with Claude Code. And they've got this new Claude Cowork thing. Let's play around a little bit with that. And I guess in online parlance, it kind of feels like Claude Code has been kind of breaking containment. A bunch of people have suddenly realized what's going on with coding agents. There's been a lot of high-profile coverage. New York Magazine ran a headline that was, quote, "How Claude Reset the AI Race." So it's kind of interesting to me, and it's kind of hard to put your hands around because it's not a specific news story. But it feels like the vibes have kind of shifted around Claude Code, and it really is kind of having this moment. So I don't know. First, I just would love to kind of talk about personal experiences. I mean, Francesco, have you played around with Claude Code? Curious about what you feel about it. Is this kind of a game changer moment? This kind of form factor of how they're delivering this technology?
I think if I should I start in. I mean we've been I've been using Claude Code myself, and within our team we've been experimenting with Claude Code quite a lot over the last few months, right? I think we really see the shift from this assisted AI to truly agentic AI coding. And I think Claude Code is definitely, leading in that space. I think if I look at how we are starting to, it's still early days, but the way how we're starting to transform the way we develop software for our clients and for ourselves inside IBM Consulting is really moving very, very quickly towards this agentic approach. So I'm personally very bullish in that. I think there are still a lot of challenges and a lot of work to be done, particularly around context engineering, around the orchestration
Yeah, we've
around
talked about like the
changing.
security issues.
Exactly, security. Also,
Yeah.
I think Chris mentioned this. I think on a previous episode, but I think the roles of the various personas in the SDLC is going to have to change. The way they work. So I think there is still a lot of work, but I'm personally very, very bullish, and I see a significant opportunity for any organization to really moving quickly toward agentic coding.
Gabe, one of the kind of interesting things of this aspect that I've been thinking a lot about is, particularly last year, you had sort of a very funny dynamic play out with a lot of AI commentary, where you'd hear skeptics basically say like, AI will never be able to do this. And then if you've been close to it, it's like, actually AI's been doing that for like the last 3 or 4 months. And like, it's happening. It's just there. You just need to play with the technology. This seems like another great example of this, where there's kind of still this like perceptions overhang where, again, Claude Code has been around for a while. You've been able to just be like, hey, program this for me for a bit. But like there has to have been this another step whereby I think like the kind of broad public is now told about what's happening. And it's interesting to me that that gap still sort of exists. I don't know. Should I be surprised?
I guess I wouldn't be shocked by it. To me, this is actually not that dissimilar to the ChatGPT moment, although maybe a little bit less seismic, only because this is like Rev 2 of it. But if you think about
ChatGPT, computers can already do this sort of thing.
Yeah. If you think about ChatGPT, the technology of a large language model had existed prior to ChatGPT, and the quality, the actual academic benchmarks that people were getting, that OpenAI was getting on their previous models, were not noticeably better than what ChatGPT was able to get, but the form factor shifted, and all of a sudden it crossed that uncanny valley into something that felt like you could trust it. And I think that's what we're seeing happening with Claude Code here. For a long time, the notion of a coding agent was still in that, like, the proof of possible is sitting there, and for those that are deep in the weeds, like, you can see where this is going, but for the general public that just gave it a whack, like, didn't really play out. And then I think probably around the holiday time, previous episodes, we talked about the launch of Gemini 3. We talked about the move from 4.5 Sonnet to 4.5 Opus in Claude Code. I think these model incremental updates, combined with probably continuous innovation in the actual agent side, the client side, determining how and when to break down into sub roles and sub agents, how and when to call what bash scripts. And actually, one of the other really interesting things it's doing is its use of just plain text markdown files to do sort of in-context memory. I think all of those tricks and tips came together with higher quality models to cross that valley into something that I can just say, hey, I'm going to go record a podcast for the next hour and a half. Would you solve this problem while I'm doing it? I didn't do that this morning, but I was very tempted. And come back and actually have something that you can feel pretty confident, A, hasn't, run away with your computer, and B, has probably gotten you pretty close to a solution. So I can say in my personal use of Claude Code, I've started to tip much more towards the just say yes and, wait for it to finish the task and then investigate and clean it up a little bit versus having to babysit every interaction. And I think that trust in the quality of the output and the safety of the process is what's combining to hit this moment. But I think, there's still those of us that are, deep in the ecosystem and have been, pushing ourselves to explore this space. And I think there are probably plenty of folks who are still sitting in a skeptical land, just like there were in the early days of conversational AI, people skeptical about, this thing can't possibly, it's just going to hallucinate. Oh, wait, no, that was actually really useful. Let me try a different question. We're going to see the same thing here.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think is most fun about Claude Code is like it's so cheap to just get something that kind of works, that it's just like lent itself to a certain level of playfulness where I'm just kind of like, at the end of the day, from like 5 to 5:30, I have a little bit of time before I gotta, make dinner for the kids. And, I just want it to program a little game for me. Right. And so it's just like kind of running in the background throughout the day. And it's just like at the end of the day, I kind of open it up and play with it. And, it's not that interesting. I'll delete it. Or like, oh, that's cool. How about you do this iteration? It's just like that kind of like very small, like, it's just like create this now. I think it's like very interesting. Chris, final thought on this is: do you buy the New York New York Magazine headline? Right, like, has Claude reset the AI race? Right, like, is this a big enough deal where an OpenAI needs to be kind of on the ready? Right, like they have kind of like gotten an edge over, OpenAI. I think in the space.
First of all, I don't want to treat this as a I told you so moment, but I'm going to say I told you so. For all the people in the comment section where they went, bro just needs to admit he got it wrong on Chris saying 2025 was the year of the agent. And then
You're so bitter about this.
The 30 people who liked it, no, I am not admitting I'm wrong. I gave Claude Code as the example, and I gave it for a reason. And in 2026, where I said we were going to move to super agent away from specialized agents, I'm sticking with I'm right. So anyway, my smug moment over. Don't attack the audience. It's always a bad move. But
there you go.
But what I would say is that I think there is a hype factor around this. I mean, don't get me wrong, right? OpenAI's got Codex, and it's very, very good. But you really need 5.2 to really get good use out of that. But it does take a little bit longer. Although the outputs are good. The Claude Code's just got a really nice experience to that. It just gets it done. It loops through. It has, I mean, we talked about this before, it has surprisingly little tools, right? So actually from an ecosystem stuff, we all talk about we're going to build MCPs and we're going to need a tool for this and tool for that and tool for this. And here is Claude Code, which has got maybe 5-6 tools at the moment. It's fetch, file system, grep. Really, that's all it needs. And it's got a great model, which is Opus 4.5. And the way it handles context is really the key to this, actually. It does a pretty good job. So actually, I think this is a big moment for everybody. And again, the super agents will come. What I think where it's really going to hit more than anything else is that once memory management gets a lot better, and I think it's still, Claude Code, if you play with it, you'll realize after a while you'll eat up your context and then you have to remind Claude where it was, and then you're back again. And again, there's also techniques like the whole Ralph Wiggum thing. We're not going to go into that. But I think memory management, once that's dealt with, is going to be an even bigger moment. And then, as you say, with Coworker, actually taking it out of the terminal, I think most people can't deal with the terminal. So actually, Claude Coworker, in that sense, making it accessible on a standard UI, I think there's just going to be a big push this year on that. And again, when we combine that with agent skills and people realize, actually, I don't need formality. I can just have something that describes the task that I want to do and let kind of Claude Code or Cowork pick that up. Then you're going to get this sort of explosive effect. So I'm excited. I think there's so much more runway to go. And I think people are going to do even more incredible things. And of course, it's a self-feeding loop because the model's just going to get better and better and better. And therefore, the outputs are going to get better. So this to quote Sam Altman, this is the worst it's ever going to be.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, the tool point, but I think it's quite interesting is that actually we were kind of working ourselves up to be for these agents to be useful, it needs so many tools. But really, in some ways, Claude Code is just it's like the triumph of grep. You can get so far with just grep alone that actually just turns out that grep is all you need, right? It's
grep
what we're
and
learning, and
fetch
is all we need. Yeah, exactly. All right, I'm going to move us on to our next topic. IBV is out with a new report, the Enterprise 2030 report. And it's a pretty interesting report looking at how enterprises are thinking about implementing and using AI. And some pretty really interesting numbers coming out of it. 64% of surveyed executives believe that by 2030, competitive advantage is going to come from innovation rather than resource optimization for AI. So the idea is we're going to start investing less in kind of AI systems that just create efficiencies to AI systems that create more kind of innovation value. 70% of surveyed executives plan to reinvest the value from AI-powered productivity gains into more growth initiatives. So there's a lot of really interesting data here. Francesco, I think one of the opportunities of having you on the show for the first time is that I know you work in this space pretty deeply. And I think the question I want to give to you to just get the discussion started is last year, towards the end of last year, we had a bunch of kind of VC firms, financial groups, banks come out with reports that cast doubt on, I think, basically the efficacy, usefulness, sustainability of AI in the enterprise, where people said, well, I think there's some stat that some very large percentage of pilots, right, we're not going to really go anywhere. And I think the discourse at that point was, okay, are we hitting a wall here in terms of what can happen? the results from this survey almost are like split screen, right? It kind of feels like executives are actually, in fact, saying, no, let's keep doing this AI stuff and more of this AI stuff in the enterprise, and that actually it will be much further up the value chain than simply efficiency. What happened? Did something change in AI in that period of time? Was the original skepticism not warranted? How do you read that kind of difference of opinion?
I think, team. I believe the what really happened particularly in 2025, is organizations that really started to see the value of AI. I think Chris mentioned the year of the agents. We're really seeing some of this experimentation really moving beyond that stage and really starting to drive productivity, particularly in functions like finance, procurement, supply chain, really kind of the operations side of the organizations. They really started to see the real value of AI, right? And you mentioned the shift from productivity to innovation. I think that was really probably for me, I wouldn't say a surprise, but a confirmation that the bigger play for AI is really on the product and service innovation rather than the productivity, right? So I think it was great to see a confirmation from executive that if they think about the 2030 kind of enterprise, they really see AI being essentially the core component of their business model, and being AI, a significant portion of their revenue being driven by AI. And I think the fact that it's now moving to product and service innovation was really, really interesting. The other aspect I would say is some of the technology choice. I think organizations have really realized that if they really want to hit those objectives and really drive the transformation, they're going to have to think way beyond just the smart LLM or the big LLM, right? I think there is a clear expectation and a clear point of view from the executive that the winners are really going to be those who are going to really focus on how can I ground all this LLM, the right LLM, into my data, right into my context, and how can I orchestrate those LLM into my business process, right? I think working on this architecture principles and setting that foundation is going to be critical for achieving these targets. The other thing I would say was also very, very strongly mentioned in the report and in the responses we got is a transformation on the skills and the roles, right? Obviously, everybody's realized that the basically the timeline, if you will, of a skills of a role is going to be much shorter than it used today, right? I think skills are going to evolve. They're going to be transformed. I think most of the knowledge workers that we know today are probably not going to exist anymore by 2030. But there's probably going to be a lot of more new roles which are going to emerge thanks to that. I think so. Seeing human creativity, ingenuity, having the right mindset becoming really, again, a critical differentiator for the humans was really interesting in the report. I think it's we're really seeing a shift in the perception of AI, and really seeing this from organization moving from thinking about adopting AI towards how do I make this as a core enterprise capability, and how do I build my business model around it.
So, Francesco, I think one of the other interesting aspects of this report is, you kind of have to see this on the backdrop of what you all are doing on Enterprise Advantage. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of the connections with what's being discovered in this report and what you guys are working on the product side?
Absolutely. As we discussed, team, the two key aspects of the report I was emphasizing was the transformation required from an operating model, from an operation point of view, as well as some of the technology choices that organizations are going to have to make, particularly around how to ground the agents into their data, about how to orchestrate those agentic workflows across their business. That's exactly why with Enterprise Advantage, what we're doing is basically taking what we applied to ourselves over the last 3 years with building the IBM Consulting Advantage platform, which has helped us basically transform the way we deliver consulting to our clients. We might now make this available for our clients as well. So through that platform, we can actually bring the capabilities, particularly around context engineering, around orchestration, around controls, to really help our clients not just infuse AI into their processes, but really looking how can they transform how the work gets done using a open hybrid AI, hybrid cloud type of architecture.
Gabe, I saw you nodding vigorously on the discussion of skills. Do you have a hot take you want to contribute on that one?
We've talked about it a bit here in various other contexts, but I do think, what we're seeing with a lot of this AI movement is sort of the the distillation of the nugget of skills into sort of the actual creativity, the ability to understand the problem space, and less in the ability to execute and, get things done. And, to our previous segment about Claude, we've seen this in development now really take off with these coding agents where, for me, I'm writing a lot fewer lines of code myself, and I'm producing far more lines of code. But the actual thinking I'm doing into going to solve a problem hasn't fundamentally changed. The form I'm doing the thinking in has changed a little bit. I'm actually just writing it down in plain old text more than I used to. But I think the actual execution of the solve has shifted, but the thinking hasn't. With the shift to Claude Cowork and enabling these same sorts of removal of the execution from things that are not coding, think PowerPoint, Excel, document creation, all of the sort of next tier of digital tasks that move beyond developing code into other, deliverables you might produce in an enterprise. I think we're going to see the same thing happen there. So I think the further removed the form factor of the execution is from producing text, the longer it's going to take, right? Like if you're talking about physically moving things from point A to point B, yes, it is theoretically a piece of execution that is ripe for automation, but the mechanics of getting that done are pretty far from generating text tokens, right? So it's going to take longer. But I think the industry is just going to keep moving on that. So that's my feeling. I don't think it's a hot take per se. I think it's just sort of a general rollout as things
It's
get
like
closer
just the
and
reality.
closer. Yeah, basically,
Yeah.
the further it is removed from a pure token, the longer it's going to take. But we're getting very good at mapping tokens to just about anything, and eventually we'll figure out how to do the same for other tasks that are really far away from text generation.
Chris, you want to chime in? That's how you go for me here.
To the point that you sort of said earlier, one of the biggest things is there's been such a focus on productivity. But what happens when you get such a lean, efficient organization? Well, if everybody's running at the same speed, where do you differentiate? Well, actually, you have to differentiate through innovation, you have to differentiate through experience, you have to differentiate through new products, etc. And that's where the exciting area we move to. So it's a natural progression from productivity to innovation. And that's the part that I'm excited on. Because actually, if you speak to any enterprise today, it's almost like they're a steam train going along and they're just shoving in the coal, right? You know what I mean? Coal's going in, coal's going in, coal's going in. But the focus is keeping the train going. Whereas actually what you want to be able to do is, how do I make this an amazing journey? Where am I going? What's the destination? Where can we explore? How do we have a great experience? What's the food in the train? What's the scenery like? That's the things that matters. Nobody's on the Orient Express to, see how good the engine and the coal is. They're there to have this amazing experience. And you know this because if you speak to any enterprise, they'll tell you that their backlog is like 2-3 years long, right? So actually, if you can use productivity of AI platforms to be able to cut down that backlog and deal with the standard stuff that's preventing you from get to the innovation and differentiation, and that moves you to focus on that, that's where the magic is going to be. So of course, focus is productivity, but it's really great to see the innovation is kind of the destination there.
I just wanted to add maybe just some perspective on, moving from this productivity to the innovation. Obviously that's, as Chris said, this is really what's really exciting about it. But I think what we also realize as part of the report, as well as with the work that we do, that I think there is still a long way for organization to get there, to get through that productivity, because I think we're still seeing organization, thinking about how to improve their process or improve the existing process without really thinking too much about how do I actually reinvent the process as AI first process, where human becomes the oversight and kind of the reviewer, but you have AI doing the execution. I think there's still a long way to go, not only technically, but also from an operating model point of view, from a governance point of view, to really transform the operation with AI, and then be really able to put the right innovation on top. So I just want to make sure that we understand that it's not just a walk in the park. Actually, get this transformation of the
It's pretty
operation.
rough.
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
Hard work. Yeah. Francesco, maybe one final question for you. So, I think one way of looking at the survey, which I think is useful to think about, is this is a survey of opinions of executives. So it in some ways reflects kind of like what people in the boardroom are thinking, what, high level folks at the company are thinking. I'm curious about like in your day-to-day work where you work with an entire enterprise. I'm kind of curious if you feel like these opinions are really kind of like, where they kind of agree with the rest of the org, where they're different from the rest of the org. Like, I guess I'm kind of curious about like where these perceptions kind of match reality, diverge from reality, even diverge from other people's opinions within an enterprise. So just curious if you have any takes on that.
That's a very good question, Tim. It's actually obviously this is the board opinion. Obviously, that's why I was talking about the productivity, the transformation is a lot of work. But I mean, if you talk about the people in the business, right, both in the line of business as well as in the IT, they know how difficult these things are, right? So they really see the real life of a business SME or an IT architect who's going to have to transform their business. So I think we really see a bit of a gap in terms of the work which still needs to happen and the transformation that still need to happen. And also think sometimes I feel that people still perceive a gap of leadership support and top-down support when it comes to the transformation, right? Because this is not just about saying this in a press release or in a board meeting, but it's really then walking the talk and really enabling your organization to do that, right? So that requires quite a bit of a change also in the leadership from the top, and sometimes that's not happening, and people in the field, in the business, they really suffer, right? So I think there is a bit of gap for sure between what the board says and what people live every day in the business.
Well, yeah, a lot to go into here. I encourage folks to check out the report if you look for Enterprise 2030. It's up on the IBM blogs. I'm going to move us on to our final topic. I think, Gabe, I was planning on talking about something else, but then you flagged this for me yesterday, and I was like, this is really interesting. We should talk about this. So a new project coming out of and sort of hosted, facilitated, if you will, by Hugging Face called Open Responses. I guess, Gabe, I don't know, you want to talk about this, so maybe I'll flag it to you first. Like, what is Open Responses? Why does it matter?
Yep. Okay, cool. So, I spend a lot of my time in open source code working on LLM inference and adjacent problems. And for most folks that are interacting with a model, it's just a model. You just send it some stuff and you get some stuff back. But there's actually a whole lot of nuance to that send it some stuff and get some stuff back. And so I want to take just a brief rewind in history to talk about what a model actually is. And then that'll hopefully set the context for why open responses is worth paying attention to. So in the bad old days before Gen AI, a model was literally a bunch of matrix math, right? You sent it numbers, you got back numbers. And you, the client, were entirely responsible for knowing what those numbers were supposed to mean on the input side and what those numbers were supposed to mean on the output side. It just got the math done. And it got it done really efficiently. And then we started to think about, okay, well, what if we put the tokenizer in the world of Gen AI into the inference engine? So now you send it a string of text, which actually has some more meaning to it, and you got back a string of text, which had some more meaning to it. But now that tokenization layer had to live on the server, not the client. And then we said, well, hang on a sec, let's not just send it raw text because everyone's got conventions about how they format their text. Let's send it some carefully formatted text that looks and feels a whole lot like a sequence of turns in a chat. But each model knows how to handle a sequence of turns in a chat a little bit differently. So now you had to put what was called the chat template on the server side. So you take that general purpose chat form of data and you splat it out into some raw text. You run that through the tokenizer, and now you get your raw output values, and then you reinterpret that back as a chat turn, and now you've got your chat APIs. So Open Responses is trying to do the next rev of what if we raise the level of abstraction of what we're putting on the server side so that the client has less that they have to worry about. So one of the most common patterns we see right now is the agent loop. So a chat API, in addition to user input and assistant responses, can take tool definitions and can return tool invocation requests. And then right now, today, generally, it's the client that has to take that tool invocation request, go actually call some function or an MCP server or something, figure out the right way to format the response from that tool and send it back to the server so that the model can actually see what happened when it called that tool and get the job done of actually responding with the tool's context. So what Open Responses is trying to do is to take that entire agentic loop that we just referenced and put that on the server too. So now you've got the agentic loop, the chat template, the tokenizer, and the tool invocations all living server side. And the client simply says, here's a thing I want to get done. And, you get it done with a stream of exhaust of what the agentic loop is doing in the interim to get it done. So there's some real benefits here. One of the things going to that history I just talked through that has happened is that nobody really standardized on an official open standard for that chat API. At the time, OpenAI's API surface was the most comprehensive, and therefore all of the inference engines just kind of copied it. But when you see an OpenAI compatible API, some of them take some extra args. Some of them, don't support this one feature that OpenAI does. And there's a mix match grab bag of support of an OpenAI compatible chat API. So I think Open Responses is Hugging Face making an attempt to get it right this time around, of actually putting the stake in the ground and saying we're going to have an open standard on how the agentic interface should look on the server side. So from that perspective, I think it's all good. Now, I do want to just call out that there's actually a little bit of a dark side to this development, which is
I was
that
hoping you get to
the
this
more
part,
you put on the server side, the more you can hide on the server side. So this is also a protection play for the agent technology, right? And so OpenAI released their responses API, note, not open responses, quite a while ago. And they have been trying to push users off of the chat completions API onto their responses API for probably 6 months at this point. And I think my read is that part of the reason they want to do that, and this is actually pretty explicit in the blog article, is that they want to hide all of the reasoning traces and all of the things that their agent loop is doing so that people can't copy them, right? One of the things we've seen in some open models is that people are distilling or using the reasoning traces from closed frontier models as training data or tuning data to actually tune and train these open models to be able to reason like the frontier models. And I think the frontier model labs are saying, wait a minute, hang on, that's our secret sauce. We want to keep that secret on the server side. And you get the capabilities, client, but you can't just, train off of our reasoning traces. That's not fair. So I think there's a certain amount of protectionism that's going in here. And what I see Hugging Face's role here being is like trying to establish this standard for the sake of the open community, and also putting a flag in the ground that says, I'm hedging against the fact that clients like this convenience of having the agent on the server, and I want to be able to have the open inference engine support that too. So it's a mixed bag. Like, I think what we're going to see here is some amount of protectionism on the frontier labs, but hopefully it'll also drive this sort of easier agent development on the client side. So if the open inference engines implement this open responses API, we should actually see, hopefully some good innovation coming out of it.
Yeah, no, so that's awesome as kind of like a recent history of how we got here in the first place. I guess, Gabe, it seems like basically like the interests are kind of aligned, right? Which is like kind of the providers want to hide more agent logic, and everybody wants more standardization in how this happens. And so kind of like with that going, we're leading to a world where we just will have more opacity in agent world. Which, I don't know, I guess is like, I guess it depends on how much transparency you think you really do need in this ecosystem. Because I guess there's point of view, the provider will just say, if the agent gets the job done, what do you care, right? Well, I guess maybe that's a good way of taking this. Like, in the open community, are people kind of okay with this trade, right? Or is there kind of some dispute about like, well, actually the dream is that we really need to know everything that's going on the agent side. And so we either those providers need to provide us with more transparency, or we need to keep more of that logic out of the server, right?
I think the losers in this transition are going to be the innovators in the agent development space, because it's going to hide more of the innovation going on behind closed doors, and it's going to slow down the cross-pollination of ideas, right? I think, the O series of models from OpenAI really kicked off this chain of thought reasoning stuff in earnest, even though it was developed in academia before that. But I think once it really took off there and people could watch it in action, it gave all of the open innovation labs creating open models, okay, it clicked. I understand how to do this. I can now some of it was direct copying, which maybe there's some ethical questions there, but some of it was just academic inspiration to say, I understand this pattern now. I'm going to, build this into my model. So I think there's potentially going to be some friction there in the open community. But I think from the pure user community, it'll probably be seen as a good thing. And then obviously the frontier labs are going to enjoy this because it gives them the ability to protect what they see as IP.
We are short on time. Chris, do you want to get the final thought in here?
Yeah, I don't like it. There we go. That's my final thought. I understand, but I'm gonna really hit the point that you said there, Gabe, very quickly, which is the chain of thought is moved to the server side. And one of the biggest changes with the reasoning models is the chain of thought is absolutely critical to getting the outputs that you want. Now, there's a really subtle distinction, right? So an agent that does chain of thought doesn't behave in the same way as a server that has been trained to reason with chain of thought. And I know that sounds a little bit odd, but what actually is happening on the model when it's trained in chain of thought, the model will reinterpret during chain of thought the operation that it wants to perform into a format so it can hit the right circuits on the back end. So if I do something like, and you can try this on GPT OSS, if I do something like, what's 5 multiplied by 5, right? And I use the words 5 multiplied by 5. When you look in the chain of thought in GPT OSS, it will literally rewrite it to 5 multiplied the symbol 5 as a symbol equals. And it doesn't matter what math function you do, it will rewrite it in that. And the reason it does the rewriting is actually in the model, in layer 15, which is the routing layer, it will literally route it. It'll say, I know this is multiplication, skip past chain of thought here, get to layer 19, that's where the calculation is going to happen and do the calculation. And therefore, you have an efficiency of the model to be able to get the output because the model is always going to do the rewriting that it wants. If you take away the reasoning formats from the users and give them a summary, then what that means is the client agent developer doesn't know what format they need to get the chain of thought in to be able to invoke the right circuits in the model. That you've taken that loop away. And what you're actually saying here is now I'm wholly reliant on the reasoner, the reasoning model, to be able to do the rewrites that I need. And I understand that is a great thing from a model provider, but what you're saying here is for the client agent framework developer, you have less insights, and I'm now relegating you to the open source space, and you don't get to find those tricks out. Now, what it also means is those who adopt that standards, remember, the models have been trained on that reasoning format. There is a tie to it. So if you look at things like the Harmony OSS format, the tokens in the OpenAI vocabulary match the vocab of the reasoning in the GPT's reasoning response API, right? So therefore, now what you're saying is you're effectively, unless you train the models in the same format, you're disadvantaging these models as well. So I get it. It's a good thing, and I love all of these things, but I don't see it as altruistic. That's my problem.
No, I think we would agree with that, right? Like there's clearly a self-interested dimension to this. I guess the question is whether or not it's dangerously so. Well, Chris, on that note, that's all the time that we have for today. Gabe, Chris, good to see you as always. Francesco, thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll have you back on the show sometime soon. Thanks for joining all you listeners. If you enjoyed what you heard, you can get us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and podcast platforms everywhere. And we'll see you next week on Mixture of Experts.
Are we supposed to say it at the same time? I've never quite understood that.
IBM!
Yeah, it literally just creates a cue in the audio so they know where to start clipping. So that's all. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Oh, wait a minute.
Great.
There's a
Very
real
helpful.
risk. This is recording now that this is going to end up in some blooper take at the end of the year.
You played
no.
yourself. You played yourself, Chris. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, no. What have I done?